How are you today, Karen?
Came in, did our walk. Mainly because I didn't have much to do with them.
No, I got a sister page over at care room session. Well, maybe that was me.
Who knows what I said? So you're trying to keep me
Blessed is God, always, now and forever, and to the ages of ages.
Amen.
What a wonderful thing to remember Marilyn today, our beloved Marilyn. It's a real honor to preside at this service and to remember her, to give thanks for her life, to remember her story, to commend her to God's love, and to stand with her in the cycle of life and death and resurrection, which we all belong in. Let us pray, beginning with a time of deep silence, to gather ourselves, still ourselves, open ourselves. Beloved God, your mercy is without end, and your steadfast love never ceases. Accept our prayers for Marilyn and receive her into the land of light and joy, into the company of your saints, for the sake of Jesus Christ, who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. Please be seated.
So I have a voice that naturally projects, so I just don't want to blow everyone's ears off. But this is good? You guys can hear me? Okay, good. Hi, I'm Mary Clayton Enderline. I am Marilyn's oldest daughter, and along with my siblings, my sister Molly Clark and my brother Tom Pierce, who's in Atlanta, we want to welcome you here today. And we are here with many of our family members and friends as well. I can't believe this day in April. Those of us who are Pacific Northwest natives know that we don't see weather like this until July 5th. And so I was like, oh my gosh, how lovely. I want to acknowledge the family and friends that have traveled here from near and far. Thank you. We have Midwesterners, lots of them actually, here, Portlandiers, people that took the ferry across the mighty ocean there. And anyway, thank you for making the journey to come and join us. Also, thank you for the church, the staff at the church, the people that have done everything, Gretchen and her daughter, and to help pull this together. I really, really appreciate it. I'm also thrilled that we're just all here to honor my mom. She's here too. She was in charge of the weather, and she did a really good job. So, yay, Marilyn. My mom, Marilyn, was born on January 4th in San Antonio, Texas, to Charles Clayton and Bessie McGuire. Charles Clayton, his birthday, my granddaddy's birthday, is today. So I think that's double cool. Anyway, she has siblings Jimmy McGuire and younger sister Patty as well. And they are in Mobile, Alabama right now, alive and well and just kicking it. My mom's first name is Jane Marilyn McGuire. And here's how the story goes. My grandfather was a big fan of Tarzan. And since she was a girl, she couldn't be named Tarzan. So he named her Jane after Tarzan's lady love. And the story also goes that my mom was potty trained by my grandfather. She was on the potty, and my grandfather would sit on the side of the tub and tell her Tarzan stories. And I kind of have those memories myself, but I couldn't swear by it. Anyway, when she was very young, she moved to Alabama. And Mama was very smart and very active as a child. I think that surprises no one. And she used to tell people that she would be accused of having something called St. Vitus dance. And so I had to look up St. Vitus dance, and I discovered that it's a neuropsychiatric childhood condition secondary to strep or rheumatic fever. It's not something we would ever say today, but at the time it was always St. Vitus dance, St. Vitus dance. Anyway, because she was so smart, she got double promoted, and also teachers weren't eager to have her as a student because even though she did really well academically, when her report cards would come in, she'd have like a D in what was called conduct back in those days. So she started college at the tender age of 16 in New Orleans. And there she met my father, and they got, Tom Pierce, and they got married when my mother was 17 years old. That is younger than everyone in this room except for one person that I'm going to kind of look at. So, but otherwise, I mean, that's really young, I thought. So, and in that marriage, she gained a new best friend. And that best friend was my father's sister named Molly Robinson. And Molly's daughters, Callie and Julia, are here with us today from Cleveland. And so I thank you for being there, and as well as Callie's spouse, Doug. So that's lovely. But what was so much fun about these two women being sisters-in-law and was that we got to have lots of family holidays together, and mischief was made. So, and my mother actually led a lot of that mischief quietly. But being raised in Alabama suburbs in the 60s and 70s of my mother was truly always an adventure. She was fun, she was humorous, she was sometimes frustrating, but never boring. And I think this kind of extends into her later life as well. But being raised by her was like a combination of the Yaya Sisterhood, The Help, and Mad Max. If they were all, not Mad Men, not Mad Max, it could have been that too, but if they were all fused together. And she used to refer to it as a three-ring circus the whole time that we were being raised, and indeed it was in many ways. But as it happened in the era of that day, women were often not encouraged to work outside of the house, and that was true for my mom. But she could volunteer, and volunteer she did. She volunteered for the Birmingham Symphony. She also volunteered, shockingly, to be chairperson of the Nixon campaign. Ooh, back in the early 70s, or what, yeah, in the 60s, late 60s, correct. And that's a role she held. So yeah, she kind of changed some things. She evolved over time, we'll just put it like that. She also did just what came naturally. She has lots of friends. She's very social. She could throw together events in a 2-hour notice. If someone called up and said, we're having 100 people for dinner, what are you gonna do? Mom would order buckets of KFC chicken. She'd serve it up on silver platters. It would look gorgeous. She'd have fresh flowers somewhere. There would be potato salad and all sorts of stuff. And it would just, you wouldn't believe that you were just eating from the Colonel's bucket, but there you are. Another thing that happened, is that when my father's had an injection molded plastic company that was a few miles south of Birmingham where he worked. He was CEO of that. And on April 1st, I think 1970, the company burned to the ground. And it's still unknown what made it burn, but you can imagine what a plastic fire must have been like. My mother, who, again, not allowed to work, but highly organized, was able to she took complete charge of everything. She ordered double wides in. She helped preserve all the records, and because of her efforts, the company was saved and still exists out there in the world. That same plastics company, but I'll have a conversation about plastics on another level. So my mother was graceful and gracious. Manners were key to her, and we learned manners, and we taught our kids manners. So even when they might have gotten arrested or something, I was always told, oh my God, your kid has really good manners. And I'm not necessarily referring to the kids in this room, but it's true. They had really good manners, even under that duress. One of the things she was really capable of doing is help soothe the soul of whoever was around her. And my cousin Julia and Molly and I were talking a couple nights ago, and something was brought up called the gift of the bath. And my mother was able to take particularly her daughters or people she loved, women she loved, and she would draw a bath for them that was perfect in every way. She'd have the right incense and the right flowers, and there was a Buddha in the corner, and tea was served. So this was one of the things at which she excelled. She was one of the world's little hostesses, and she taught us to also be little hostesses when we go out in the world, so that we are able to help make people comfortable, and we are able to feed people and draw them a bath if they want that. Mom was a loving person. She was compassionate and warm. She brought out the best by saying the right things when a person needed it. One example is my sister when she was emerging out of her adolescence or out of her preteens years into her adolescence. She felt really awkward and gawky. And my mother helped convince her that she was absolutely beautiful and lovely. And consequently, Molly became a model. And she was a model with the Eileen Ford Agency for a period of time. But it was my mom's helping build up that self-esteem. My cousin Julia told me the story about how, well, and this was true, Julia often hung back and she was rather observant and kind of quiet. And my mother noticed her being quiet and observant like that. And she decided to make Julia a confidant. So she would point out the quirky and weird things about us or give Julia secret knowledge. But through that, Julia gained some gifts from my mom. Mom just knew how to do the right thing for the right person. So she was also just a really cool person. Cool mama. So you know how everyone has that cool mama that you grow up with at whose house you hang out? Our house was kind of like that for some of our friends. And our friends, she was able to take our friends under her confidence. She was beautiful in and out. She was known for her physical beauty. She was also a model. She was a hand and hat model, of all things, back in the 60s. People used to say to us, "How's your pretty mama?" And it was like crazy making. It's like, I mean, these days it's so focused on the physical and not necessarily on the inner, but back then it was very, very much the physical. I mean, she's a beautiful woman. What can you say? And she used to wear it seemingly effortless. And yet, as my cousin Callie and I discussed earlier this week, one of her biggest mottos is, "You've got to suffer to be beautiful." And she would say that to me. I had this wild red curly hair, and she would tease it. This is in the 60s, and tease it to puff it up into a bouffant. And so, yeah, I suffered. And I suffered, and then I wasn't into that much beauty anymore. It's just like, I'm just going to let things grow out and not wear makeup and all that stuff. So that was the end of my suffering. Mama was a fierce mama. So back in the 70s, our brother Tom stepped in a snake pit. Well, it wasn't a pit, it was a hole, but he got 3 snake bites. Snake pit? Okay, they're agreeing. And so he was rushed to the hospital and was seriously ill. My mother, out of revenge, went to where he was bitten, which was a piece of property we owned, and she had it all dug up with a backhoe, okay? And where is the poor snake to go? But into our lake house. And that's where it was found. The snake was subsequently killed. My mother took the snake to the butcher shop, and the butcher shop filleted it out, and my mother ate that snake. She ate it as a fondue dish. And the skin of that snake is still hanging above my brother's fireplace in his rec room. True story. Fierce. Do not get in her way. She will eat you. So she's also quirky. Another story about her. Joe's Ranch House in Birmingham was a private club that she and my father would go to. And it was in the 70s. Again, women were not allowed to wear pants, but Mama had on one of those fancy 70s paisley pantsuits with the big bells and all that stuff and kind of long tunic. And she got in and they said to her, "Ma'am, Marilyn, sorry, Miss Pierce, you cannot wear pants." And so my mother unzipped the pants, took them off, and handed them to the valet and said, "No problem." So she also, she sung, when we were preparing for the ceremony, people would say, "What are the songs that your mother sang to you as a kid?" Well, my mother sung us dirty songs and bawdy songs, but nothing appropriate for this church. One of the songs she sang to us a lot was "Never Laugh When the Hearse Goes By, 'Cause You Might Be the Next to Die." And we would sing that and laugh and laugh. The worms crawl in, the worms crawl out, the worms play pinochle on your snout. So when they're asking me what should they play at the service, I'm like, I wonder how that would go. My mother was also a lover of cats, and anyone who knew her knew this. Our first cat was named Ruby Begonia, and that was a really interesting cat. And then when she moved here to the island finally, and other people will get into her being in this island, but she was walking down North Beach Road, which is where our cabin is, and with my son Kyle, and as she was coming back, a black cat followed her. And that was the beginning of a series of black cats that ended up following her or on her doorstep. And she had those cats until she left the island, and then she developed more cats. She had more cats. They found her when she was off island. My mom was also really spiritual. She was involved with the Episcopal Church back in the day, and then Eastern philosophies, and I'll speak more to that in a few minutes. My mom and dad separated in the 80s, and she began to pursue those academic and professional goals that she had put aside, as well as much deeper spiritual work and personal evolution, which led her from Alabama to Pennsylvania to Colorado. DC was in there somewhere, and finally to Orcas Island. Okay, she thrived here for 30 years amongst so many of y'all, and others will elaborate, as I mentioned earlier, about her time here. She left here in 2016 and moved to the Atlanta area to be closer to my brother, and she died there 6 years later. Few little last stories. She helped start a church in Birmingham, Alabama, an Episcopal church called St. Stephen's, and it was in 1973, and she was one of the 5 original trustees. It's a church that is thriving to this day. Molly, when she was reaching out to my sister Molly, as we were preparing for this, she reached out to a friend who wrote this letter. Molly, I love how you were not only able, but almost likely searching for what was at the heart of your mom's work for so many years. I do not know if you need to look further now that you have a copy of what has been written about her by Reverend Doug Carpenter, who was helping found that church as well. You may or may not be aware that Doug's father, Bishop Carpenter, was one of the 5 Birmingham ministers who penned the letter to Martin Luther King, which stirred King's response in Letter from Birmingham Jail. In 1973, when your mother provided her support of Doug and his efforts in starting Stevens, now in its 50 years, it started 10 years from the time of that famous letter was written. Yeah, that was pretty cool. One of the stories, when the early days of that church, Mom was, again, this was in May of 1973, and things were just getting off the ground, and she was at a restaurant in downtown Birmingham, and she witnessed the aftermath of a freight train accident upon which a gentleman, a drifter, was hit, losing his arm and his leg. And my mom, she was one of the, I'm not gonna say she was a first responder, but she was certainly a first witness to that. And she ended up thinking about this man, his name was George Prather, and visited him in the hospital and met him and sensed that he was looking for something. I mean, obviously he was in pain and agony. So she reached out to Doug Carpenter at the church, and together they went to see George, and they had him baptized with a Dixie cup in the hospital. And through that, he became a lifelong member of the church. Now his life didn't live that much longer, but for the next 20 years, he joined the church and remained part of that community. And for the rest of her life, Mama welcomed any and all into her churches, whether it was an Episcopal congregation or a community of other spiritual believers, or simply those who held the concept of God as being great outdoors. So she embraced everyone. My mother, Jane Marilyn McGuire, was born in the Yanaguana, or the land of the spirit waters, now known as San Antonio, and the ancestral home to the Payaya. She spent her early life in Alabama, where the mound-building tribes of the Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, and Cherokee lived. She moved to Orcas and spent 3 days in this area inhabited by the Salish coastal tribes. And finally, she's laid to rest in Conyers, Georgia, which is on the border between the ancient homes of the Creek and the Cherokee. Conyers, and I'm almost finished, then I'll be off. Conyers is now home to a Trappist monastery, and she was able to have the funeral there that she wanted. It was a green burial amongst family on a perfect October day, much like this one 6 months ago. All of her requests of how she wanted to be honored were specifically typed out, and we did the best we could to follow her directions. But she wanted a woven basket, and we had a woven basket. She wanted it covered in indigenous flowers and plants, and my sister Molly wove those. She got those, she picked them, and they were all over her beautiful casket. She asked that she be put in a clean white nightgown. We found one on Amazon and got it ordered, exactly what she wanted, as well as warm white socks. She requested that her hair be done in a certain manner, and that she just had a little bit of makeup that is applied. And all of this was typed out, but written in her own hand and underlined 3 times was "no bra." She will not suffer to be beautiful, but we all know she always was, and she always will be. Thank you.
My friendship with Marilyn McGuire grew gradually over time, as most friendships do. But I still remember the day that I first met her. How could I forget her? When she came into my shop, she looked as though she had walked in out of a dream. Very glamorous, radiant, with a big smile on her face. And as the weeks went by, we continued to talk more and more and laugh more and more. You know how it is with friendships. It takes time to get to know each other. And at some point, I'm not sure exactly when, we just seemed to mesh. At first, there were lunches, and then we had dinners and cocktails and dinner at our house and hanging out at her house. We told ourselves that we were sisters from some past life who met up again in this lifetime. We even shared spiritual stories. We were kindred spirits that as time went on, we seemed to become closer and closer friends. Sisters from another mother? Perhaps. Marilyn and I shared an interest in the spiritual. I inherited that from my father, who taught his daughters to just be more open and be more aware. I remember the time that Marilyn and I met at the Rosario bar for a bite to eat and a cocktail. We were talking about spiritual things when suddenly, with no live person nearby, the light on the wall next to us fell and broke all over the floor. We both stared at each other for a moment, and Marilyn gave me a funny look and said, in Marilyn's voice, "Well, you just never know, do you?" When our dog Buddy was very sick and dying, Marilyn came into my shop to say goodbye to him. She crawled under the table and laid next to him for about 10 to 15 minutes. After saying her goodbyes to Buddy, she told me that he was between two veils, meaning he was leaving us, and she could sense that. Marilyn was such a good friend. When I was president of the Chamber of Commerce, she would come to my annual meetings just to help me. She told me that she just wanted to serve me, bring me food and wine, and take care of me during the annual meeting. She was so considerate, kind, and giving of herself. I remember once long ago when I was looking for help at the Chamber Shakespeare Festival, and Marilyn said to me, again in Marilyn's voice, "How can I help?" How can someone so beautiful, so intelligent, so worldly, also be so kind? I missed her very much after she moved to Georgia, but we often talked on the telephone, catching up on things here and there and reminiscing about the past. Orcas had been very special to Marilyn, and she loved to hear what was happening here, right here in Orcas, and about her friends here. As I look out now into the crowd today, I suspect that she and I probably talked about most of you. Please know that she missed you all. Marilyn and I were lucky to be friends. I know that I was lucky, and she felt she was lucky. And based on our beliefs, we will meet again in the future. So long for now, Marilyn McGuire.
I just want to take all of this in. And I want us to all just take a breath and feel it, because there we go. Okay. Because Marilyn would want us to linger longer talking about her. She would have just loved all of this. And then she would say, "And there's a party waiting for you." And there's a party waiting for you. So in service to that, my name is Gretchen Crump, and Marilyn McGuire was my first friend on Orcas Island, and I met her before I ever moved here. My friend Lenny introduced me to her. And we were looking for another place, another way of living. And our kids were little. And we came out to Orcas in 1989, 1990. Marilyn was my guide on what was happening on Madrona Point. And she'd been here for a few years. But I have 4 brothers, and my brother Stephen, who was 29 at the time, and this was in 87, 88, 89, was HIV positive, and he had AIDS. And what Marilyn gifted me with more than anything was her generous self and her spiritual network. She introduced me to Bernie Siegel and Louise Hay and Deepak Chopra in those early NAPRA days. And she kind of walked that road with me until Stephen passed in 92, and we moved out here in 93. But I also loved that she was a grandmother of sorts to my kids. My youngest, Annie, was here in first grade, and she would be oftentimes after school in Marilyn's office with Courtney Scarfudo looking for some snack change, which Marilyn always had a drawer full of something to give them. Yeah, and that's our Highland way, right? And so when I look around the circle that's here, that has known her in so many ways, we'll have time for those memories and stories at the reception afterwards. So never fear, folks will get a chance to share. And if you take a look at what's up here, it's representative of Orcas Island pottery and stones from the Salish Sea, Sally Bell's jewelry. There's a nautilus shell, a candle. It's a circle of friends. And it's there for all of us in service to the amethyst that's offering up, the guidance and the wisdom. So, Marilyn, this party is for you. And I'm going to read you something that's really special to me. She's gone. You can shed tears that she is gone, or you can smile because she has lived. You can close your eyes and pray that she will come back, or you can open your eyes and see all that she has left. Your heart can be empty because you can't see her, or you can be full of the love that you shared. You can turn your back on tomorrow and live yesterday, or you can be happy for tomorrow because of yesterday. You can remember her and only that she is gone, or you can cherish her memory and let it live on. You can cry and close your mind, be empty and turn your back, or you can do what she would want. Smile, open your eyes, love, and go on.
Good afternoon, and thank you for being here. Yes, thank you. And thank you for your love and your friendship for Marilyn. Marilyn would want us to celebrate today, and to celebrate what it means to be human, and for the extraordinary potential for humans to be kind and to accomplish great things together. I am Christoph Enderlein, Marilyn's son-in-law, and married to Mary Clayton, who spoke earlier. I have learned so much from Marilyn, and I am so grateful for her being in my life and for her kindness and her leadership. I grew up in the Northwest. All right, let's get this adjusted. And spent most of my childhood summers and many visits during my adult life about a mile away from here at my parents' farm on North Beach Road. I had never met folks from the South before, and it changed my life. So Marilyn was the second person I had met from the South, and the first person who I had met was Mary Clayton, who I had met 1 month earlier. And so Mary Clayton had called by phone, and she was living in Seattle, and she said, "Hey, my mom's in town, and both of you have a lot of interests and a lot of people in common." So I was really curious about that. So she was referring to our interests in holistic medicine, in positive social change, and in sustainability. It was early August, and the two of them came to Orcas over a weekend. To put it in the simplest terms, I was enchanted with both of them. And it's predictable what happened next. So I fell in love with Mary Clayton, and Marilyn fell in love with Orcas. It was 1985. Marilyn was 49 years old, and I was 24. And so a new chapter began in each of our lives, in each of our three lives. Marilyn stayed on the farm at North Beach Road for a period of time, and Mary Clayton and I became regular weekend visitors. Marilyn's heart soared during her life here on Orcas. She loved each of you and the Orcas community. Her work here with you gave her daily inspiration to grow her vision of the human potential through collaborative work together. She grew within and so deeply appreciated you. She kept her focus to always cultivate the positive work. Each project, each author, each speaker, musician, and artist became part of this journey together, not isolated and alone, but supported, encouraged, and celebrated for their work, for your work, and the collective visions and contributions to positive social change. She felt at home because in her heart, she was home here. She loved the rain. She loved the changing seasons. She loved her children. She loved her grandchildren. And a Southern term I learned from her, she loved them to pieces. She made extended visits to her son and daughter's families every year. At times, she was like a kite on a string, but still anchored to the ground. She planted spring bulbs in her garden and made time each day to watch for the daily coming and going of the two eagles that visited the trees above her house. She loved her cats, and she loved fresh air, and she would often sleep with her door open to her backyard deck. And she got a kick out of the occasional visits by the raccoon family that would sometimes quietly come inside at night, and her cats never liked that. She loved to walk and took great joy in each visit around Mountain Lake. And she loved to cook, and she taught my 3 young boys the secret of perfect rice was you add a stick of butter. I learned from her about communication with family, to call regularly, to visit often, to have meals together, to celebrate successes, birthdays, holidays, Easter egg hunts, and home cooking. And we often had a New Year's Day picnic up at the Mountain Lake Shelter. And on warm, quiet evenings, eating dinner, sitting on logs out at North Beach. She never missed cheering us on during the Steve Braun triathlons. And she regularly stayed with us in Mill Creek during our coming and going from SeaTac. She filled our days with smiles and humor and generosity. So each of us here has a story of our life with Marilyn, what we've learned from her, and what special memories we carry forward now as Marilyn sails free. In the words of Dalai Lama Gwalwa Rinpoche, give the ones you love wings to fly, roots to come back, and reasons to stay. Thank you.
What beautiful remembrances. Before I read this little piece of scripture, I want to say that I think that Marilyn would want you to hear this with ears that imagine the word God as huge as you can possibly imagine that. Whatever was holy, whatever was other, the thing that she served, the people that she served, all of that was holy and sacred to Marilyn. So when you hear the word God here, you put in what you saw in Marilyn's life that she dedicated her life to. That thing that goes on and on and on. Paul wrote, if we live for God. And if we die for God. So then, whether we live or whether we die, we are God's own. Let's have a time of deep silence. God of all creation, who cannot be contained by our boundaries, by our definitions. Light from beyond the galaxies, sea without a farther shore. You are present in every place, in every moment in history. You are here and now. Help us to know today that those from whom we are separated in death by its long silence, its aching absence, are each of them in your presence, that beyond our horizons, beyond our boundaries, beyond our understanding, they are held in your embrace through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
I thank you, God, for Most This Amazing by E.E. Cummings. I thank you, God, for most this amazing day, for the leaping greenly spirits of trees, and a blue true dream of sky, and for everything which is natural, which is infinite, which is yes. I who have died am alive again today. And this is the Son's birthday. This is the birthday of life and of love and wings, and of the gay, great happening illimitably earth. How should tasting, touching, hearing, seeing, breathing any, lifted from the no of all nothing, human, merely being, doubt unimaginably you. Now the ears of my ears are awake. Now the eyes of my eyes are opened.
Please. I'm going to do a little ritual here now as we send Marilyn off, as we bid her farewell. And this is quite a extraordinarily beautiful altar that Gretchen has put together, presided over by Marilyn in all of her glory. We have, in the Christian tradition, a baptismal candle and some baptismal water, and we, at a normal Episcopal funeral, we cast water on the remains, the coffin, to remember that this person was baptized, that this person belongs. So it seems really fitting to me that basic ritual is expanded upon here, because Marilyn was always building on her faith beyond the borders of traditional religion, bringing in wisdom from so many traditions. So it seems so fitting that instead of water from the font here, we're using water from the Salish Sea. And we're using water that is infused with our prayers and blessings for her. It's time to bid you farewell, Marilyn. Goodbye, and God bless you.
Safe journey home.
Marilyn, we have prayed for you. We have read poems for you. We have shared stories of you. We have sung songs for you. Goodbye, and God bless you.
Safe journey home.
Marilyn, we want you to know that we love you and we miss you. We feel your presence around us so strongly. Goodbye, and God bless you.
Safe journey home.
Goodbye, Marilyn. Go well on your journey. Goodbye, and God bless you.
Safe journey home.
Go now. Go with your hopes, with your wonder, with your questions. Go in peace.
We go in love and peace.
Go now. Go and be one with all that is and all that will be. Go in peace.
We go in love and peace.